Today I'm going to review The Information. A History, a Theory, a Flood by James Gleick, author of Chaos. So this is the second book I've read by this author. The first book I read is Chaos, The Making of a New Science. It's a great book. I think he wrote that book back in like the 80s, and this book came out a lot more recent. So a lot of time's passed in between those two books, and I haven't read any of his books in between. So I was kind of interested to get this book. I knew a decent amount about information theory. I had read the autobiography of Claude Shannon, and I've read a lot on computing, and information theory has a big part in that. So I was pretty familiar with a lot of the topics going into this, but having liked the author's first book so much, I thought this would be a great book to read. You know, it's a subject I like, and so I had high hopes for it. After reading it, I think I have to say I'm a little disappointed. On one hand, the writing was really good, and every time he's telling a story or he's writing about a topic, you know, it's always engaging, it's entertaining. He's a great author. However, you know, after reading the whole book, I was really disappointed with the level of technical depth. I figured since this is a pretty big book and it's about a very technical subject, and the author's first book was on a really technical subject as well, I figured this would be a pretty technical book. And what I found when I read this book was that it's clearly targeted at a very non-technical audience. Not that that's a bad thing, because a lot of technical books are written for a general audience, but the books try to explain the technical information in its full depth. And I felt like this book just glanced over a lot of things. So I kind of knew that this book was not going to be that technical right in the beginning, because when I came into this book, I figured that pretty early on in the book, the author would talk about information theory and Claude Shannon and really explain that whole concept, because Claude Shannon created information theory, and that's kind of the technical basis for all information sciences, and everything, all the sciences really took off after he introduced, you know, information theory in, I think, like the mid 40s or the 50s. You know, it was a while ago. So I figured the author would introduce that pretty early on so he could build on that further, because like I said, the initial science happened in like the 40s or 50s. So, you know, a lot's happened since then. So I figured it would introduce information theory and then build on it and kind of tell the story of the explosion of information. And what the book was it focuses a lot more on the far history of information. And it starts in like the 1800s. And the book doesn't even explain information theory until about halfway through. You're like, a few hundred pages into this book before it explains what I felt would have been very introductory information. And so I kind of knew that the book wasn't going to have time to build up to the depth that I wanted it to. And, you know, that kind of bothered me a little bit. But the whole time I was reading the book, I was entertained and it was interesting. So, you know, I kind of have I don't know how to feel about it. You know, on one hand I liked it, on one hand I didn't. So what I think I would tell people is, if you know a lot about information theory, don't expect any technical insight from this book. It's a series of kind of stories and topics about information, but it really doesn't tell the full story of the technical implications of information theory. And when I say it's a series of stories, I mean it really feels like a series of distinct essays. The book, the way it's written, each chapter has a pretty distinct topic or subject that it's talking about, and each chapter kind of just jumps into a new story, and altogether they all kind of surround information and information theory, but you know, there's not a lot of overlap chapter to chapter, because it just picks up a new idea in the next chapter, and it leaves the subject from the last chapter behind when it moves on. And so it kind of feels like a bunch of different stories, you know, like you're changing the channel. And every story doesn't have enough time to get to a deep level of technical understanding. But it is kind of this fun book where you get a lot of different looks into how information theory kind of has changed the world or how people dealt with trying to understand information. So it was an interesting book, but I don't think it's for the very technical reader. So keep that in mind if you're interested in the book. If you kind of have a casual interest in information theory, but you never learned anything about it, this would be a great book to read. You'll probably love it. Like I said, if you know a decent amount about information theory, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. So just be prepared to kind of be entertained, not necessarily to learn a lot. So hope you guys like this review. I've got more reviews coming soon. So like, subscribe, and hope to see you guys in the next one.